everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the top 5 fantasy tropes that I think are extremely underrated and not talked about nearly enough. Okay, I lied a little bit because only 3 of these are specific to fantasy, and even then, you know, you can see them in other types of literature as well. 2 of them fall outside of fantasy, but I think they could easily be combined into fantasy and still work out great. This is just a list of my top 5 favorite tropes. At some point I'll probably do a list of my least favorite tropes as well, but right now I just want to say as sort of a disclaimer that anything to do with romance, so a romance specific trope, is not gonna like fall on the good list for me. I like romance, and there's some that, you know, guilty pleasure get to me, like the one bed trope, forced proximity, but I hate most of the other ones. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell icon so you know when I upload new videos. I upload 3 days a week. If you're a little confused about the word trope, you're not entirely sure what that means yet, a trope is something that is commonly used by authors and storytellers as a plot device or situation that characters are put in, and it's something that we see over and over with little differences depending on the story, but a trope is essentially something that everyone uses. An obvious example is a love triangle. Every single young adult book written between 2007 and 2017 has a love triangle in it. Yeah, quote me on that, it's true. The first trope that I would like to talk about isn't necessarily actually a trope, maybe? Again, I don't know the exact definition of trope, but something that I love in books is extreme environments. And I am talking about the physical setting, and extreme is a loose term, but basically what I mean is that the story takes place primarily in a very difficult environment for the characters to exist. That can be super hot, super cold, super stormy. It can be more man-made, like the entire story takes place on a ship, whether that's in space or on the sea. Both are equally volatile. And I do enjoy environment as a sort of secondary or tertiary villain or adversary. Well, there are a million examples of this. Like, I just finished reading The Adventures of Mina al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, and there's definitely a lot of extreme environments in that book. The go-to example that I'm going to use is Dune. We all know Dune. If you haven't read it, you've probably seen the movie because Timothée Chalamet and Oscar Isaac. Whilst the bulk of the story, or at least the first half, is based in politics, political scheming, family relationships, and spooky magic, a lot of the Dune series focuses on the environment of Arrakis and how unlivable it is unless you know how. I think the reason that I love that trope so much is that it adds just another layer of depth to the story. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of a classic medieval setting or a modern setting where the characters are doing important, difficult things, but they're never really worried about, you know, they're gonna burn to death in the sun, or they're gonna freeze to death, or they're gonna run out of water, or a storm is gonna destroy their house. If that's not also happening, I'm kind of like, what's the point? The second trope that I love so much I am calling Giant-Army-ex-Machina. If you don't know the phrase, Deus Ex Machina is basically a plot device where things are going bad for the characters and then the author is like, and then they're fine. As annoying as Deus Ex Machina as a trope can be, Giant-Army-ex-Machina is phenomenal. The #1 best instance of this, and I'm actually going to get a tattoo that is based on this, is in the second Lord of the Rings book, The Two Towers, Helm's Deep. You're probably familiar with the Battle of Helm's Deep. You've read the books or you've seen the movies. We are talking about when the sun comes up on the 5th day of the siege and Gandalf comes over the rise with the riders of Rohirrim, and Éomer and his freaking riders come charging down into the valley and chase the orcs away. It's the best thing ever. The Uruk-hai. Sorry, I'm a fake fan. Giant-Army-ex-Machina actually happens so much in Lord of the Rings, and I will never be mad at it. It even happens in the Battle of Helm's Deep prior to the Riders of the Rohirrim coming, when the elves show up. We see it in Return of the King with the Ghost Army. Like, it's great. We get it in John Gwyn's work, we get it in Brandon Sanderson, we get it a whole lot in Tolkien. Everything, every high fantasy or epic fantasy out there has a Giant-Army-ex-Machina moment, and it will never get old. Trope number 3 is a little bit complicated. It's not something that I actually find in the books I read very often, we are going to call this trope the absolutely unhinged woman. The most basic way to explain who the absolutely unhinged woman is to think of Harley Quinn. She's Harley Quinn, but for my taste, she's better than Harley Quinn. Because here's the thing, here's the crazy thing. Harley Quinn, too sane. My go-to example of the absolutely unhinged woman is actually Himiko Toga from My Hero Academia. She's just utterly bonkers and it's beautiful. An example of an actual literature unhinged woman that I adore, although she doesn't get too much page time unfortunately, it's Ian from The Briar by Anthony Ryan. I don't know why I love this trope so much. One reason is probably the mixture of horrific violence versus sweet and nice. So like Toga from My Hero Academia is a schoolgirl who will drink your blood for fun. And she wants to be a villain. That is her purpose in life, is to be an absolute villain. Another great example is Jinx from Arcane specifically. If you haven't watched Arcane, I highly recommend it. Jinx's entire backstory is phenomenal. I think the best thing about it for me is when everyone knows that there's this character that's just absolutely bonkers, and no one's like, the point of the story in her arc is not to help her and fix her. It's like, yeah, we know she's crazy, but she's a part of our group and she's really useful sometimes. Look, I love a strong female character. I really do. We need more of them, but we also need more utterly insane women, you know? You know? I don't know how well I'm explaining this trope, but if you know, you know. The fourth trope that I want to talk about today is one that I know a lot of people love, and it is meddling gods. Gods or beings or whatever. Powerful beings that are out there that should not be part of the story because they're not really supposed to be there, but they just come in and they mess with the characters because it's fun. This has a similar theme to the unhinged woman I'm feeling. Something wrong with me? And I'm not talking about meddling gods in a way of like Thor and Loki in Marvel. Yeah, they come in, especially Loki, and mess things up, but they are main characters of their own stuff. They have a totally logical through line in the story. No, what I'm talking about is more like Hall of Smoke by H.M. Long. In the series we have Hessa, who is a devout priestess of her specific religion, made up obviously for the book. And while, you know, she knows that the gods are real, she believes in them, it is known in this land that gods are real. You don't interact with them very much, but oh, we get gods in this book and they are just hanging out being annoying. Trickster gods are the best kind of gods. But whereas, like I said, Loki has his own problems and storylines and stuff going on in Marvel, the trickster god in this series is really just there to be annoying. And actually another example that just popped into my head is, oh, in Supernatural, I forget, like I don't want to give away things for Supernatural, so I forget how this character is originally presented, but this guy. I love when a hero character has their story going on, but it ends up being such a tiny part of a huge overarching story. And that is what happens a lot in stories that have meddling gods, because, you know, we have our usually human character going on their journey, their quest, and it's so insignificant to the actual world that's going on around them. The last trope that I want to talk about probably is not one that's found in fantasy unless it's very specific fantasy. So it's more relegated to the horror, I almost said horror industry. So it's more relegated to the horror genre because it is what I'm calling, we all know this house is haunted and we're just vibing. So yeah, obviously this would be most prevalent in haunted house stories. I love all haunted houses, don't get me wrong. It's great when the characters start experiencing a haunting and they freak out, and that, like, that's the story, them escaping the haunted house. But what's even better is when the characters discover the house is haunted, but they don't really have anywhere else to go, and they kind of just have to coexist. A great novel that I read recently is The Spite House by Johnny Compton. This is a prime example of this because the family, these little guys down here, get hired to live in a haunted house and like take note of what's going on, what sort of haunting stuff is happening. So they go in fully aware the house is haunted and they literally just have to deal with it. I think my number one example of it though would be the Conjuring series. A lot of them are good, but The Conjuring, the first one, where we get to see the family first experiencing the hauntings and it's terrifying, but then sort of time progresses and they're just living in the house, waiting for stuff to be resolved, but they're still living there. It's really hard for me to explain these tropes because, as the title suggests, they're not talked about enough, so I don't really know how to put them into words. Like, it's so easy to say like, oh, my favorite tropes are love triangle and the hero's journey. Everyone knows what that is. But I'm out here saying my favorite tropes are Giant-Army-ex-Machina and unhinged women and extreme environments, and we all know this house is haunted, but we're just vibing, and of course, Meddling Gods. All right, those are my top 5 fantasy tropes that are not talked about nearly enough. Totally underrated tropes. Let me know in the comments if you love any of those tropes or what your favorite tropes are. And I know I was kind of crap talking romance tropes, but absolutely put those in the comments too if you love them. They're valid. Everything's valid. We need to be nice to each other. And honestly, while I was doing this list, I thought of like 8 more favorite tropes that don't get talked about enough. So maybe I'll do a follow-up video on this, a part 2 at some point. Before I go, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell icon so you know when I upload new videos. I upload 3 days a week. I love you guys. Goodbye.